Good afternoon, y'all. Thanks for hanging with me till 5:30. Much appreciation, and thank you, Dr. Newman. It's an honor to be here. I'm going to talk today about a 2-year study I've been participating in down at Clemson University. We examined 2 forage species, legume or grass, with or without corn supplementation, to see how these different treatments impacted animal performance and meat quality of forage finished beef. So, brief introduction. Though forage finishing beef remains a niche market in the U.S., it is one that continues to grow each year in terms of consumer demand and producer interest. This is in part due to perceived environmental benefits generally associated with low input systems, but also some of the recent work by Pelletier, who demonstrated higher levels of carbon sequestration in forage finished operations when compared to feedlot finished operations, as well as decreased levels of eutrophication agents in the soil of forage finished operations when compared to feedlot finished operations. There are also some human health benefits associated with forage finished beef when compared to feedlot finished beef. These are generally going to be a leaner product, less fat, a healthier omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio, higher levels of the anti-carcinogenic conjugated linoleic acid, as well as some studies will show higher levels of fat-soluble vitamins and B vitamins. Some recent studies will demonstrate that legumes, when they're incorporated into a pasture finish mix, will improve animal performance. And the work of Roberts et al. Down at Auburn demonstrated a linear increase in animal performance as corn supplementation rate increased. There's also been some work showing that when you supplement steers, you can increase your stocking rate. In general, forage species, there's very little research on how forage species alone impacts animal performance and meat quality. And though there is some research on how corn supplementation impacts animal performance, there's very little about how these different rates of supplementation impact meat quality from a human health perspective. So the objective of this study was to analyze the effect of 2 forage chains, legume or grass, with or without a 0.75% body weight daily corn supplementation on animal performance and meat quality. All of the research was conducted at Clemson University on the Beef Cattle Research Farm in Clemson, South Carolina. It was a 2-year study. Each year we had 16 steers with an initial body weight of about 440 kilos. So over the 2 years we had a combined of 32 steers separated into 4 different treatments. 8 steers per treatment, The 4 treatments consisted of legumes with no supplementation, legume with corn supplementation, grass with no supplementation, and grass with corn supplementation. Again, the rate of supplementation was 0.75% of body weight plus 150 milligrams of monensin per head per day. It was approximately a 105-day finishing period on either the legume or grass forage chain. Our legume forage chain consisted of Alpha Gray's 600 Roundup Ready alfalfa, and that was followed by Eagle Seed Company's Large Lad forage soybean. Whereas the grass group consisted of Max Q Tall Fescue, followed by Promax's brown midrib Sudan grass. We use Kalin gates out of Kalin, from Kalin Incorporated in Northwood, New Hampshire, to separate steer into their supplementation. And as you can see here, we have our supplemented steers grazing with our unsupplemented steers. And each steer had their own individual bunker. This enabled us to feed each steer based on their own body weight, which is important in considering steer the experimental unit. We were also able to graze supplemented and unsupplemented steers in the same paddock to help prevent confounding variables associated with paddock. So steers were rotated every 14 days and maintained at a stocking rate of 1 head per hectare, very light, and diet samples were collected each time the steers were moved. The samples were freeze-dried and ground in a Wiley mill, 2mm screen. Then we analyzed for NDF and ADF using the ANCOM system and did crude protein using internal combustion at the Clemson Ag Service Lab. They were grouped and analyzed by the 4 different steer weigh periods throughout the season. Our methods for animal performance and meat quality, the steers all finished at about 500 to 550 kilos, or 11 to 1,200 pounds. They were fasted overnight and then weighed the following morning for a final weight. that point, they were transported to Brown's Packing Company in Gaffney, South Carolina, approximately 130 kilometers. 24 hours post-mortem, carcass characteristics were taken by a trained USDA professional, and the 6th through 12th rib section was removed from the steer and brought back to Clemson for fabrication. At 48 hours post-mortem, the entire longissimus dorsi, or the ribeye muscle, was removed from the rib section, and 5 steaks were cut 2.5 centimeters thick and randomly allotted to our aging treatments. Aging was at 2, 4, 7, 14, and 28 days. At this time, they were frozen at 0 degrees Celsius after aging. Then they were later thawed, cooked to an internal temperature of 71 degrees Celsius, and then analyzed for tenderness, using the Warner-Brotzler shear force test. An additional steak, also 2.5 centimeters thick, was aged 2 days. It was removed of all fat and connective tissue, freeze-dried, and used for meat quality analysis, which consisted of in the research we're looking at today, fatty acid analysis using gas chromatography in Dr. Duckett's lab at Clemson. The statistical methods we used to analyze animal performance and meat quality, we had a 2x2 factorial arrangement of treatments and a completely randomized design, which consisted of the mean plus the main effect of forage type plus the main effect of supplementation plus the interaction of forage type and supplementation plus residual error. So as you can see here, we're able to analyze legume versus grass, and we're also simultaneously able to analyze corn supplementation versus no supplementation, as well as to see if there's any interesting inconsistencies or interactions between the 4 treatments. So getting into forage quality, just to kind of show you what the steers were grazing, means with separate superscripts are significant at a p-value of 0.05. As you can see, our crude protein for legume is higher, as would be expected, than grass. We averaged 24% during the season versus 19% about for grass, pretty high. NDF was, as expected, also lower for legume, about 30% for legume versus 51% for grass. And as also would be consistent with the literature, ADF, or acid detergent fiber, did not differ between the forage species. So now getting into animal performance, all of the graphs will appear this way, and it's important to note that forage type and supplementation are not being compared to each other. They're just simply occupying the same graph to save time. There was also no significant interactions, so only the main effects will be presented. The y-axis here, we got kilogram per day. As you can see, legume gained higher at 0.81 kilos per day versus 0.72 for grass. And supplementation also showed an improvement in average daily gain, about 0.9 kilos per day versus right around 0.64. In terms of hot carcass weight, or the hot hanging weight, about 317 kilos for legume versus 303 for grass. And supplementation also improved at 318 kilos versus 302 for non-supplemented steers. Dressing percentage follows the same trend. We had some pretty good dressing percentages, but 59.9% for legume, or I think it's safe to round that to 60, and grass at 58.5. Supplemented steers also followed the same trend at 60% about for the ones that were supplemented versus non-supplemented at 58.5. In terms of USDA quality grade, we were unable to find a significant difference, which was going to be expected for grass, for our forage type, but I was a little surprised with supplementation. It's worth noting that USDA choice on this scale is at 5.0, and though there was no difference between supplemented and unsupplemented steers, it's worth noting that 69% of supplemented steers graded choice, whereas only 53% of unsupplemented steers graded choice in our study. In terms of tenderness, forage type, supplementation rate, and the forage by supplementation interaction were not found significant. There was a decent trend there for forage type. The only significant impact on tenderness was days aged. As you can see, we have force to shear the piece of meat, which is what we use for tenderness, and then on the x-axis we have days age from 2 up to 28. According to the work of Miller et al. Down at Texas Tech, guaranteed tender, according to him, is right at 3 kilograms of shear force. So you'll notice that our steers reached guaranteed tender right, about 4 to 5 days of aging before being frozen. As in terms of the omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio, an important indicator for human health, forage type showed no significant difference, whereas corn increased the fatty acid ratio 3.1 versus 2.4. It is worth noting that according to health professionals, the ideal ratio in your diet is 4 to 1 or less. So all of our treatments were within the healthy range. In terms of the anti-carcinogenic conjugated linoleic acid, the cis-9 trans-11 isomer, forage type had no significant difference, 0.58 grams per 100 gram versus about 0.53, but supplementation decreased CLA. This would be expected, though fairly similar, so more work needs to be done to see if this is actually biologically significant. So in conclusion, the steers that finished on legume compared to grass gained an extra 0.1 kilograms per day. Their final hot carcass weight was 14 kilograms higher and at a 1.5% higher dressing percentage. Overall, forage type showed very little impact on meat quality. In terms of supplementation, the supplemented steers, when compared to non-supplemented steers, they gain an extra 0.25 kilos per day, finished with a hot carcass weight that was 16 kilograms higher, and again, a 1.5% increase there in your dressing percentage to right about 60% in our study. Overall, the supplemented steers had a slightly higher omega-6, omega-3 fatty acid ratio, though still within the healthy range for human health, and about a 15% reduction in your cis-9 trans-11 CLA. As expected, and is very well supported by the literature, tenderness was only impacted by aging and not by diet. And take-home point here is overall, the forage type legume did show improvements. Forage type in our study had minor impacts on animal performance and meat quality, but supplemented steers showed a pretty decent increase in animal performance while not really impacting the meat quality from a human health perspective. With that, I will take any questions. Thank you. The question was, what are the economics? And I prepared as I knew that would be the first question. It cost us about $105 per steer, and we only got an extra $65 in profit if you take the on-the-hoof weight. I believe we did the numbers at $1.80 per pound. The break-even point in terms of what would the cost be for the bushel of corn would need to be right at $4.35 a bushel to break even. But there's also some, this is where it's going to be different depending on the producer and their situation. You have the possibility of increased stocking rates, so you can carry more animals. You also have the potential for alternative feeds or a different way of sourcing feeds that are not at $7, $8 a bushel like corn. There's also the potential for direct marketing or getting more than $1.80 a pound live weight. You know, direct marketing, there's certain ways that this may actually work out, so you really got to crunch the numbers yourself and look at your own operation and what's available to you for alternative feeds. Yes, sir.
Relating to the range of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids that you reported in nutrition, can you compare that to the range of omega-6 to omega-3 that's been reported for grass-fed beef alone?
Grass-fed beef alone, you'll see numbers from, I'd say right around 2 to 1 is my experience with the literature and what we've seen in Dr. Duckett's lab. I mean, sometimes they'll be up around 3 to 1, but for grass only or even forage only, a legume is going to be similar. In fact, legumes often have a slightly lower omega-6, omega-3 ratio because legumes tend to give rise to higher levels of C18-3, linoleic acid, linolenic, which is one of the main factors in coming up with the omega-6, omega-3 ratio. Anybody else? Well, thank you for your time. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. Sorry about that.